Honorable Vice Chancellor, the Director of the Sir Syed Academy, office bearers of the university, deans, faculty members, distinguished invitees, and students. I am honored and humbled by the invitation that has been extended to me to deliver a lecture that is in Sir Syed's memory. I am aware of the names of some of the people who have earlier been invited to deliver this lecture, and that increases my sense of humility. So therefore, I am thankful particularly to the Vice Chancellor for having made possible my first visit not only to AMU but also to Aligarh. I hope though that this is not going to be the last visit. In the introduction, it was said that I was born in Shillong. Not very long ago, even 20 years ago, when people saw that Shillong on the passport, or wherever I had to state the place of my birth, I would often be asked, where is this? Is this Sri Lanka? Today people do not ask that anymore. Coincidentally, next week, I have been invited to go to Shillong and deliver a lecture there in the memory of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Sir Syed and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, they were born at a very similar point in India's history. Their birth dates differed by a few years. Their death years differed by a few years. But it does make one wonder about the foresight of people like Sir Syed, the foresight of people like Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, who had a dream for India. They were reformers in different senses, and right at the forefront of whatever they wanted to do was reform education. In what I'm going to say next, it is a general talk, but in what I'm going to say next, I'm particularly going to address the students. The students who are here today are privileged. India is a young country. We've heard that several times. We've heard about the demographic dividend several times, but even today, amongst the young, just over 25% of the young population is able to access higher education. Marginally. And that is the reason I said that you are privileged, because you belong to that 26%. Not only have you had that privilege of access to higher education, you have had that access to higher education in one of the oldest and one of the best universities in the country. And therefore, if you do not change change India, then who's going to change India? The future of India rests in your hands. And that is the reason I said that whatever I say next will primarily be addressed to you. India is about the future. India is about what is going to happen to India 20 years down the line, despite increases in life expectancy. In 20 years, in 30 years, everyone who's on this side, with the exception of my friend the Honorable Vice Chancellor, who is remarkably healthy, everyone else is going to be dead. It is you who will be alive. And that is the reason I said the future of the country is in your hands. And this entire topic of revisiting economic reforms is therefore addressed particularly towards you. Today, you will read in the newspapers. Tomorrow you will read in the newspapers. Today there are other things that are more important from the headlines point of view, but tomorrow you will read in the newspapers. Next week you will read in the newspapers that India will soon be the 5th largest economy in the world. India will soon be the 6th largest economy in the world. Now all of that is true. But India's per capita income today is 2,000 US dollars. There was a famous economist named Lord Keynes. Lord Keynes said and wrote a lot of clever things. So whenever there is something particularly clever and you don't really know who said it, it is invariably ascribed and attributed to Lord Keynes. 2,000 US dollars? I don't know what that means. Is that high, low, rich, poor? Lord Keynes was apparently once asked, "How is your wife?" And he said, "Compared to whose wife?" So like that 2,000 US dollars, is that high or low? India's income is of course in rupees. If I am going to convert it and make comparisons with other countries in the world, I have to use a common numerator, some common yardstick, and that, because of the importance of the US dollar, has become the US dollar. And hence, India's per capita income is 2,000 US dollars, just about. The richest country in the world has a per capita income of 175,000 US dollars. So we've got 2,000 US dollars and we've got 175,000 US dollars. There are rosy projections about the Indian economy. Of course, the projections are right. But despite those rosy projections, 20 years from now, India's per capita income will increase from 2,000 US dollars to about 4,500 US dollars. Which means, despite being the 5th largest economy in the world, despite being the 6th largest economy in the world, India will still be relatively poor. This could not possibly be what Sir Syed had hoped for. Sir Syed would clearly have hoped for a more prosperous India so many decades after independence. So many decades after independence, India ought to be doing better. India should be doing better. India will be doing better provided the younger generation realizes and accepts what is to be done. There are different ways to look at this problem. Per capita income. What is per capita income? Per capita income is nothing but the total income of the country divided by the population. That's what per capita income is. And therefore, a country's per capita income depends on the average productivity of its citizens. So another way of asking that question is, if India is going to become more prosperous, if India is going to become more developed, then what can we possibly do to increase the average productivity of India's citizens? Before my friends from the economics faculty point out that here is the chairman to the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister who is misleading the students, let me be more accurate and say it is the average productivity of India's citizens who are in working age groups. But the point remains the same. We need to increase productivity. Question is, how do we increase productivity? And what does productivity depend on? I should first quickly say that no country in the world today is completely insulated. And therefore what happens in India economically, not just non-economically, what happens in India economically also depends on what is happening to world economic growth, on how the rest of the world is performing growth-wise and economy-wise. And that in itself is a separate topic for a lecture. So I shall just ignore that and I shall focus fundamentally on things that are internal to the country. Obviously, if India is going to do well, if India is expected to do well, the rest of the world, the economy has to perform far better. But as I said, that's a separate topic, so let us concentrate on the domestic. On the domestic, I think one of the first questions to ask is, what do we want the government to do? In this country, we expect the government to do everything. Everything must be done by the government. And particularly since I began to work for the government, and I have worked earlier for the government way back in the mid-90s, whenever people catch hold of me, they come and say, the government must do this, the government must do that. Why isn't the government doing this? We will come back to that issue in a moment. But let me remind you of the preamble to the Indian Constitution. And how does the preamble to the Indian Constitution begin? The preamble to the Indian Constitution begins with the words, "We the people." Unless we the people play our role in changing India, I think it is unreasonable to expect that the government will suddenly come along, wave a magic wand and change India overnight. It's not going to happen. The government is part of the overall ecosystem. If the overall ecosystem does not improve, if the overall ecosystem does not become efficient, if the overall ecosystem does not become competitive, it is completely unrealistic to expect that suddenly the government will come along and change everything. We the people. Reforms. Conventionally, most economists say that these reforms were substantively started in 1991. The director of the Sir Syed Academy is indeed right. Some initial movements happened when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister, but the substantive economic reforms really started in the year 1991 when the Prime Minister was Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Finance Minister. 1991. In 1993, I decided to conduct an experiment. Mind you, I didn't work for the government then, but I decided to conduct an experiment. I went to the leading chambers of commerce and industry, FICCI, ASSOCHAM, CII, PhD. I said, give me a list of your members. So I drew up a list. 1,000 top members of the chambers of commerce and industry, Hall of Fame of Indian industry. 1993, remember? Those days, no WhatsApp, no email, mostly fax. So I sent faxes to them complaining about very trivial matters. Very, very trivial matters. Let me give you an example. I sent a fax to Britannia and I said, I buy your Bourbois cream biscuits, but half the time I find that the cream is on the wrong side. That kind of trivial complaint. Out of 1,000, 4 replied. 996 did not reply. Out of the 4 who replied, 3 said, we are very sorry to hear about this. Our authorized representative will call on you soon. It has been more than 25 years that authorized representative has not come. So only one out of 1,000 responded to my complaint. But it is the same industry which will come and expect that suddenly the government should become extremely responsive to their complaints. In January 2015, as was mentioned in the introduction, I joined government. So then we moved to government accommodation. Very nice government accommodation. Like dutiful citizens, my wife and I wrote to our banks, just for the record, different banks, but private sector banks. We wrote to our banks saying our address has changed. Please note the new address. Between the 2 of us, 3 different banks, private sector banks. Bank said, ownership papers of the house. You don't have ownership papers of the house. All right, rental agreement. I said, there's no rental agreement. Utility bills. I said, there is no utility bills, the government pays. This correspondence went on for 6 months. I couldn't change my address. I couldn't change my wife's address. Then on a Sunday evening, my wife tells me, what is this? You're supposed to be a member of Niti Aayog, you're supposed to shape policies for the country and you can't even get your bank address changed. So on Sunday evening, I sent SMSs to the heads of the 3 banks, and of course I knew them. Monday morning, the addresses were changed. But it is these same bank people who will come to me and expect the government to suddenly become very efficient. After this government came into being, I was appointed the chairman of a committee that was supposed to examine the restructuring of Indian rails. In the course of that, I travelled on trains throughout this country. And when I say I travelled on trains, I do not mean the Rajdhani and Shatabdi. I travelled on ordinary trains. In the course of this, on one particular occasion, at 2:30 in the morning, the train, not a Rajdhani or a Shatabdi, that we were travelling on, happened to stop at a deserted railway platform in this state, not Agra. 2 in the morning, completely deserted railway platform. We were waiting for a Rajdhani or a Shatabdi to pass. So we found out from the TT that the train was going to stop there for 20 minutes, so we got down and began to walk up and down the platform. There was no one on that platform except one food stall. Along comes a very tall person, very hefty person, buys a packet of chips from that stall, eats the chips and throws the wrapper on the platform. And I can see my wife watching, and I know what is going to happen. So I'm 10 feet behind her, pretending I don't know her. And I said, here we go. With all apologies, this state does not have the best of reputations, or did not have the best of reputations. She goes up to this man, taps him on the shoulder, and says, "Utha ke kachre ke dibbe mein dal." Man looks at her, picks it up, puts it in the garbage bin. And both of us marvel at this, and we go to that food stall owner and say, "What is this? Unimaginable." And he says, not our words, he says, before the Swachh Bharat mission, this would not have happened. And this is what I mean by we the people. In the course of my work, I am sometimes asked, what is this smart city mission? We don't understand what it is. Well, the ministry has a template for what is supposed to be a smart city, but after that, what is smart is determined by the citizens and inhabitants of that city in consultation with the municipal government and the state government. So if you look at the 2 top cities which were chosen in the smart city mission, Bhubaneswar and Pune, you will find that the citizens of Bhubaneswar have interpreted smartness in a certain way, the citizens of Pune have interpreted smartness in a completely different way. And this again is an example of we the people. The giving up, the voluntary giving up of the LPG subsidy is also an example of we the people. Earlier I used the word government. Sometimes your teachers, I'm talking to the students, will use the word governance. So you should ask them, what is the difference between government and governance? Do the 2 words mean the same thing? They will give you very sophisticated definitions produced by OECD, by EU, by World Bank on governance. But you should still ask them, Then do the two words mean the same thing? If they mean the same thing, why are we unnecessarily using the word governance? If you look at all of these sophisticated definitions, you will find that what distinguishes government from governance is the role of citizens in the decision-making process and the implementation of decisions. So just park this thought with you, that as I said, if India has to change as citizens, as privileged citizens who have benefited from the Indian education system, somewhere down the line, you must pay back. Now let us turn to the role of the government. What is the government and what we mean by government? Why am I asking what we mean by government? Because we have 3 layers of government and we often tend to forget it. These 3 layers of government are the union government, the state government, and the local bodies. We want the government to do everything. If I take a vote around this room and ask you, give me a list of the things that you want the government to do, I will have a list that will be very, very long. But there is always a question of prioritization. Every time as a student I manage my monthly budget, I have to do a prioritization. If I'm going to go eat a pizza, if I'm going to order a pizza, I can't go and watch a film. There are trade-offs. But so far as the government is concerned, we think there are no trade-offs. That's not the case. There are trade-offs. The government has limited fiscal resources. The government has limited administrative capacity. If I expect the government to do 50 different things, the government will not do any of them efficiently. How much does the government collect in taxes today? Union plus state government together, 17% of GDP is collected as taxes. Union government plus state government, 17% of GDP is collected as taxes. Now let us add on our fingers the demands. Remember that figure, 17% of GDP is collected as taxes. 10% must be spent on infrastructure. China is spending 15% on infrastructure, you must spend 10% on infrastructure, right? 10% on infrastructure. We must spend, when I say spend, I now mean public expenditure. I am talking about public expenditure. We must spend 6% on education. 10 plus 6, 16. We must spend 4% on health. 16 plus 4, 20. We must spend 3% on defense. I'm already at 23%. If as citizens we are going to pay 17% as taxes and without adding anything else we are already at 23%, then we are not doing our prioritization right. We are not doing our prioritization at all. Do not misunderstand. I am not saying there is no inefficiency in public expenditure. Of course there is. But notwithstanding that inefficiency in public expenditure, that substantive point remains. If you look at it from the lens of prioritization, I think everyone around this room will agree that the most important item for governments to do anywhere in the world, not just in India, is law and order and security. Externally, speed of dispute resolution. If a government does not do this satisfactorily, the government has not delivered. The reforms. What are reforms? We all have our own subjective lenses with which we look at the question of reforms. Economic reforms. Oh, is Air India being privatized? That is my definition of economic reform. But behind that entire economy, there is a legal infrastructure. Which is why I said that the most important role of the government is in ensuring law and order and security. As critiques of what the government is doing, or as critiques of what the government is not doing, how many times do you ask questions about law and order? Let me tell you about Lal Bihari. I don't think you heard about Lal Bihari, but so I should tell you about Lal Bihari. In the introduction, it was mentioned that I was involved with the law reforms project. In the course of that law reforms project, I met Lal Bihari. What was special about Lal Bihari? Lal Bihari was a government school teacher from UP. He had an ancestral plot of land, and his maternal uncle coveted that piece of land, so the maternal uncle bribed the Tehsildar to declare Lal Bihari dead. So Lal Bihari was alive, but he had been declared dead. So Lal Bihari was fighting a battle to prove that he was alive. He stood in the elections against the then Prime Minister. He went and threw stones at the police station. He worked in a government school, so he made his wife apply for a widow's pension. He remained dead. Then Lal Bihari did some research. And Lal Bihari discovered that there were 25,000 such dead people, alive but dead, in the state of UP. So Lal Bihari formed the Dead Man's Association, Mritak Sangh. He was the founder, president, secretary of Mritak Sangh. He changed his name to Lal Bihari Mritak. Because he thought he would synergize the attempts of all of these people and prove that he was alive. But he remained dead. When I met Lal Bihari, I found this a fascinating story. So I began to write about Lal Bihari. This was so strange a story that it was picked up by Time and Newsweek and others also. There is a genuine prize that is given out of Harvard, and this is called the Ig Nobel Prize. It's a genuine prize, you can Google it on the net. It is given to people who have strange pursuits, who do strange things. So Lal Bihari was awarded the Ig Nobel Prize for Peace. And Harvard invited him to go and receive that prize. But Lal Bihari could not go because the Americans would not give him a visa, he did not have a passport, because he was dead. To cut a long story short, Lal Bihari was declared alive eventually. It took him almost 20 years to prove he was alive. What happened to the remaining 24,999? I don't know. I've lost touch with Lal Bihari. A film is apparently being made, or for some time there's been talk about a film being made about Lal Bihari. The trouble is, two separate directors have not been able to persuade a hero to play the role of Lal Bihari. before I end this law bit, let me also tell you, the only reason I am telling you this other story is it should not appear that I am constantly blaming you. This other story is from Maharashtra. When I became involved in this law reforms project, I asked several of my lawyer friends, what is the longest standing case in India? No one knew. I personally tried to track a Seth versus Basak case for which the last hearing had been held in Calcutta High Court in the year 1915. So I changed my question. I am not interested in ongoing legal disputes. Tell me what is the longest case that has been resolved. My lawyer friends still did not know. So I looked up the Guinness Book of World Records. And the Guinness Book of World Records told me that India has the record for the longest standing dispute ever in the history of law. This is a dispute that started in the year 1205 and ended in the year 1966, so it took 761 years. I found this very strange. What was this dispute about? This was about a family in a village near Pune, where the family had divided, and the entire dispute was about which branch of the family should now have the right to worship at that ancestral shrine. I found this very strange. 761 years, so many things have changed, legal systems have changed. Even then I started to write about it. After some time, I get a letter from a gentleman whom I shall not name, from Hyderabad. Let's just call him Mr. Reddy. So Mr. Reddy writes to me saying, "Dear Mr. Debroy, you have been writing about this. Have you actually seen the court records?" I said, "No. I just saw this entry in Guinness Book of World Records." 3 months later, I get the fat bunch of files. This gentleman, Mr. Reddy, is not his real name, had gone to this village, had collected those court records and sent me a set of photocopies, and in the set of photocopies with the letter he said, if you look at this, you will find that the case was actually started in 1964, January, ended in December 1966. So it took a little less than 3 years, so the case only lasted a little less than 3 years. In the course of its obiter dicta, the judge said the roots of this can be traced back to 1205, which of course is not the same thing as saying that the case took 761 years. So I shall be thankful if in future you don't write about this. So okay, thank you for correcting me, but what was your interest? So he writes back to me saying, I now have the entry for the longest standing case in India. Because this gentleman, Mr. Reddy, was superseded in 1945. He used to work for the government, fought against the government, went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and in the year 1990 he won his case with all the retrospective benefits. So I congratulated him and said, I hope you're in the Guinness Book of World Records. He said, no, Guinness has now told me that they will not have any more entries on Indian legal systems. But you will be happy to know that I am the Limca Book of Records. Now the thought I want to leave with you is this. How many times as citizens do we question this? The government that has come into being in May 2014 is an executive government, union government in Delhi. There is the judiciary that should rightly be there. There is the parliament which should rightly be there. We don't want to become a China. These checks and balances are necessary parts and parcel of our question the efficiency of the functioning of Parliament? And how many times do we question the functioning of the efficiency of judiciary? Government. After forgetting about law and order and security and justice delivery, the question to ask is, are people in working age groups voluntarily poor? It is my submission to you that people who are in the working age groups are never voluntarily poor, unless they are disabled. Able-bodied people in the working age groups are never voluntarily poor. They want to improve their lives. Old people may be different. If they are still poor, and if India is still a poor country, they must lack access to things we in Delhi and in Aligarh often take for granted. What are these things? These are things that the private sector is never going to provide. These are things that the government must provide. These are areas where the government cannot abdicate its responsibility. And what are these things? These things are some elements of physical infrastructure. Roads, water, electricity. Some elements of social infrastructure. Education, by which I don't mean higher education, I mean school education. Health, by which I don't mean tertiary hospitals, I mean primary health centers. There is a quote from Gandhiji which people quote indiscriminately, where Gandhiji said, India lives in its villages. People quote it all the time. They probably quote it without having read the actual passage where Gandhiji said it. Because the actual passage tells you how many villages there were in India at the time that Mahatma Gandhi wrote this. And the figure is 700,000. Today we do not have that many villages. Over a period of time, villages disappear. They become uninhabited, they assimilated into larger villages, larger urban agglomerations, and today we have 600,000 villages, not 700,000. 7 decades after independence, we should all be shocked that until recently, out of those 600,000 villages, 100,000 villages did not have the all-metal pakka road. They did not have the electricity. They did not have provisions for the gas connection. They did not have toilets. They did not have access to financial products, financial inclusion. They did not have access to markets. Now, all of this. I'm not going to give you details of what the dashboards of the government say. That's not relevant. But what is important is prioritization. That these are things that should come right at the top of that priority list, as should social infrastructure. But I mentioned to you government and the 3 layers of government. Who delivers these? In most instances, they are not delivered by the union government. In most instances, they are not even delivered by the state government. They are really delivered by local government. I'm sure you read newspapers. I'm sure you watch television. Ask yourself, how much of time does media spend on analyzing the union budget? How much time does it spend on dissecting what the Union Finance Commission is doing? And how much time does it spend on analyzing state government budgets and what the State Finance Commission is doing? Today, 70% of public expenditure happens at the level of the states. 50% of capital formation of investment happens at the level of the states. But as citizens, this is not an issue we get very agitated and upset about. So this is the second major thought I want to park with you, that several people, not just economists, have argued that India as a country is excessively centralized. It was centralized by the British because of colonial reasons. Immediately after 1947, it was centralized because of planning reasons. India has been much more centralized than China ever has been. And therefore, one big agenda is a decentralization agenda. One big agenda is a fiscal decentralization oblique devolution agenda. And this is one big thought I want to leave with you. And particularly for students, I want to say that the next time you hear the expression center-state relations, please vehemently protest. Center suggests that it's a center sitting here and everything else is a periphery outside. The word center does not figure in the Constitution. The word used in the Constitution is union. So what we really